Okay, let's unpack this. Think about America. For generations, it's been, portrayed as this incredible place, right? A beacon for global talent, ideas.
Absolutely. Built on welcoming people from all over the world, it's a core part of the narrative.
A narrative of opportunity, intellectual freedom, the
Yeah.
best and brightest could come and contribute.
Yeah, that's the ideal.
Exactly. But we've been digging into a whole set of sources lately that, well, they paint a really different picture,
Hmm.
discussing some pretty dramatic and, frankly, concerning shifts happening right now in U.S. visa policy. Seems like things really kicked into high gear early 2025.
Yeah, the material we reviewed definitely raises some powerful questions, not just, the legal technicalities, but what these changes mean.
Right, what they mean for America's identity, its economy, its whole place in the world, really.
Precisely.
So our mission today for you listening is to really get into the weeds with this. We'll break down the new policies, look at the reasons being given.
And explore the really significant arguments and, crucially, the real-world impacts highlighted in this material.
What does it all actually add up to? Let's figure that out.
Okay, so let's start with what the sources describe as the core of this crackdown, the policies themselves.
And this apparent new focus, right? It seems like it's about policing more than just whether you entered legally.
Exactly. The material points to a rollout of incredibly stringent visa rules starting early this year. And they seem particularly focused on international students and workers.
Yeah, that comes through loud and clear.
And what jumps out almost immediately when you look at the information is this specific emphasis on scrutinizing, well, basically punishing people for what they say online.
Online expression.
Yeah, especially opinions that aren't seen as aligning with certain political viewpoints.
That's quite a departure. And it broadens what can get you into trouble, doesn't it? We saw that specific announcement. U.S. Embassy in India, May 27th, 2025.
I remember that one.
Mentioning how seemingly minor things, like missing some classes, maybe dropping a course, that could suddenly put your visa on the line.
Right. But here's where it gets, according to our sources, really interesting and maybe more concerning. They argue that those examples, like attendance, are almost a distraction, a smokescreen.
A smokescreen for what?
The deeper issue they highlight is that this isn't really about whether you showed up for class. It's more about policing thought.
Policing thought. Wow, how does that actually play out? What examples did we see?
Well, the material gives cases where visas got revoked, not because someone failed, Chemistry 101,
Right.
but because they went to a pro-Palestinian protest.
Yeah.
Or they posted something online that got labeled anti-Israel.
Okay, so major political stuff. But did it stop there?
Apparently not. That's the thing.
Yeah.
We saw mentions of seemingly, pretty innocuous posts causing problems. Things like supporting climate activism.
Climate activism, seriously.
Yeah. Or even just sharing, and this is a direct quote from the material, a cheeky meme.
A meme. So something you might just casually share on, like Instagram or Twitter, could actually threaten your whole future in the U.S. That's wild.
That is precisely the concern being raised. The sources talk about these really vague reasons given for visa terminations. Things like supporting radical groups.
Which sounds serious, but what does it mean in practice?
Well, they cite Hamas as a specific example used. But a crucial point the sources make is that these allegations are often really strongly contested by the students themselves.
I bet. And the scale of this.
Yeah.
It's not just a few isolated cases, is it?
Not at all. The material reported over 4,700 international student visas canceled just this spring.
4,700.
Yeah. And the emphasis was on how often this happened with hardly any notice or a really unclear explanation. Just boom, you have to leave.
Which forces students to leave immediately out of fear, even if they think it's wrong.
Exactly. It creates this immense uncertainty, this distress. I mean, you imagine being years into your PhD,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're facing deportation and you barely understand why.
The human cost. The sources really drive that home, don't they? There was that one story.
A South Asian student in Houston.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was powerful.
Lost his lab job, had to go home, visa revoked. And the point made was, even if you fight it later, even if maybe the decision gets overturned.
Like getting back.
Right. The material highlights how incredibly hard, maybe impossible, it is to just return. Once you've been forced out like that, the disruption is often permanent.
It really underscores it, doesn't it? These aren't just abstract policy changes. They dismantle lives, careers.
And it's crucial, I think, for you listening to understand, and our sources were very clear on this tightening. It's not only hitting students.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The net seems to be cast quite a bit wider. We saw reports about crackdowns extending to travel agents,
Travel agents, why?
particularly in India, yeah, accused of helping people migrate illegally.
Ah, okay. There was that specific date, wasn't there? May 20th, 2025.
That's the one, detailing how the U.S. put visa bans on some unnamed agency owners, executives, framing it as targeting alien smuggling networks.
Okay, I see the connection now.
And beyond that, the material also talks about a broader push to deport undocumented immigrants,
Right.
noting there are an estimated 18,000 Indians in that group alone. And the sources point out the impact this has on industries in the U.S., like agriculture, hospitality.
Which often rely heavily on that workforce.
Okay.
Okay, so we're seeing this pattern. Stricter rules, new reasons for visa issues hitting different groups. But the material we looked at really digs into a deeper sort of philosophical tension here.
It does. It acknowledges up front, fair enough, every country has the right to control its borders.
Sure, address illegal entry, visa overstays, that's basic national security.
Right. But then comes the counter-argument, and it's a powerful one in these sources.
Sure.
When the U.S., a country that, let's face it, constantly promotes itself as a leader of the free world,
Yeah.
built on liberty, opportunity. When that country starts weaponizing social media posts, is it still just border security? Or, has it crossed a line?
A line into policing speech itself.
That's the question being posed. This tension between the stated values and the actual policies seems to be a really recurring theme.
And to hammer that point home, the sources use these really striking, almost, dystopian hypotheticals.
They do, like picturing a brilliant 19-year-old from Mumbai accepted to MIT,
Shop school.
gets their visa denied. Not for bad grades, but because they retweeted Greta Thunberg.
Wow. Or the grad student from Delhi, chance at Yale.
Gone. Because they liked a Black Lives Matter post online.
The material presents these as, plausible outcomes now.
That's how it's framed.
Yeah.
Not as wild exaggerations, but as terrifyingly possible scenarios under these new rules. Absurd, but possible.
It feels absurd.
And the sources definitely lean into the irony, almost sarcastically asking, when exactly did free speech become a visa disqualifier?
Yeah. The idea of deporting someone for a meme, it's highlighted as just chillingly ridiculous.
It's that contrast, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trivial online clicks versus life-altering consequences.
Exactly. And the argument seems to be that America's historical strength came from attracting diverse thoughts, not surveilling and potentially punishing them via social media.
Which risks alienating the very talent that fuels innovation, the economy.
Which is, brings us right to the tangible costs, the economic fallout, the human impact. The sources get into the data here.
They do. Let's talk numbers for a second. Our analysis pointed out 2023 figures, roughly 386,000 H-1B visas issued.
Okay. And the India connection.
Huge. About 3/4 of those went to people from India.
3/4. Wow.
Yeah. These are your highly skilled tech workers, right? Engineers, coders, data scientists.
Yeah.
Absolutely vital for the U.S. tech sector.
So despite official statements about supporting visas for, quote, competent people,
The sources raise the question, well, how are we defining competent now? If your online opinions, even indirectly, can disqualify you, especially given this crackdown's focus.
that's a fair question. And then there are the students themselves, economically speaking, over 1 million international students every year in the U.S.
And the material is crystal clear. They pour billions into the U.S. economy. Billions. Tuition, housing, just daily spending.
Propping up universities, local businesses.
They're a financial engine for many communities. So the argument made is pretty blunt. Kicking these students out for joining a protest or posting something online,
Yeah.
it's like the U.S. is shooting itself in the economic foot.
Yeah. Why do that? The sources seem to suggest it might just be for political points.
That's the implication raised, that the economic self-harm is maybe being ignored for political reasons.
It's a tough equation to balance. And circling back again, because the sources keep doing this, it's not just about dollars and cents.
No, never just that.
Yeah.
They constantly emphasize the real human cost. We read about the intense mental toll, students facing cancellations describing mental anguish, deep feelings of vulnerability.
Yeah, that really stuck with me.
It's a powerful point they make. Just being told, often abruptly, you're not welcome anymore after you've invested so much financially, emotionally, moved across the world.
Over a tweet, potentially?
Over a tweet. It feels, the sources suggest, fundamentally cruel. And that's framed as a major consequence we need to consider.
It's hard to argue with that, especially given America's image, and the sources also provide some really valuable historical context here.
They do, drawing a really stark contrast between what's happening now and the U.S. approach, say, after World War II.
Right. They describe that era as one of, well, remarkable openness. Programs like the GI Bill, the Fulbright
It
program,
wasn't just about education, was it? It was about fostering this genuine exchange of ideas.
making the U.S. a magnet for global talent. People like Einstein, Fermi. They
Wow.
came not just for the facilities, but for that atmosphere of intellectual freedom.
And now, when we look at today, the sources draw a line connecting this current focus on scrutinizing social media.
To darker times,
Yeah, like the McCarthy era, blacklisting people based on perceived subversive ideas.
which leads to that really pointed question the material raises.
Would someone like Einstein, famously outspoken, even get a visa today under these kinds of rules?
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What kind of talent, what kind of minds might the country be actively pushing away now?
And this isn't just an internal U.S. issue. It has global ripples. The material makes that very clear.
Yeah, countries like India, obviously with so many students and H-1B workers heading to the U.S., they're watching this like hawks.
Intensely. The sources say the Indian government is assessing the impact, particularly on those critical H-1B visas that fuel its huge IT sector.
And the implication is,
Well, the clear suggestion is that if the U.S. clamps down too hard, India and other nations have other options.
they're not locked in.
Exactly. The sources mentioned they might look more towards Canada, Australia, countries in Europe,
Yeah.
places described as having generally less, well, less draconian policies.
Less focused on policing online speech, perhaps.
Perhaps. And the material also briefly situates this visa stuff within a wider context of other U.S. policies that could be seen as more confrontational globally.
Like the aggressive tariffs mentioned.
Right. That threat of, what was it, 100% duties on BRICS plus nations if they challenge the dollar.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
And there was that quote cited, attributed to Warren Buffett, calling tariffs like that potentially an act of war.
Strong words.
Very, but it underscores how these different policies, visas, and trade might be viewed overseas as part of a bigger, maybe more isolationist message from the U.S.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. What our deep dive into these sources seems to show is that this visa crackdown, it's way bigger than just immigration paperwork.
Absolutely. It's fundamentally about what America, stands for on the world stage.
Challenging its claims to moral leadership, highlighting maybe a double standard when it comes to policing social media.
Which is something the U.S. frequently criticizes authoritarian regimes for doing.
Exactly. And there's this potent warning that comes through about the slippery slope.
If a tweet can get you deported today.
What's next? Liking the wrong news article. Attending a rally that falls out of political favor.
The fear articulated is that dissent itself, even minor online dissent, could become a barrier for anyone wanting to come to the U.S. to live, work, or study.
It raises huge questions about academic freedom, open discourse, the ability to speak your mind without fearing deportation, even before you arrive or while you're there legally.
Serious questions.
But our sources don't just point out the problems, right? They also hint at potential ways forward.
They do offer some suggestions. One clear one is for the U.S. to maybe refocus its enforcement energy. Prioritize actual border security dealing with illegal crossings rather than, combing through college students' social media feeds.
Makes sense. What else?
A big call for transparency. Provide clear, specific reasons for visa bans, for deportations. Move away from these vague notices, or worse, no explanation at all.
People deserve to know why their lives are being upended.
You'd think so. And crucially, the material suggests kind of a return to first principles, remembering America's own history.
That opening the door to talent, fostering idea exchange, that's what actually built the country's strength, not closing it off.
That openness was the engine of innovation.
And we even saw discussions about strategies others might use in response.
Yeah, like India actively looking for other partner countries for its students and workers, diversifying.
And maybe a bit depressingly, the advice reportedly being given to students and workers.
To consider using burner accounts for anything controversial they might want to say online.
Yeah. Which, if that's where we are...
It says a lot, doesn't it? About the chilling effect these policies could be having on just open expression, the free exchange of ideas the U.S. claims to champion.
So, okay. We've taken this deep dive together, explored the policies, the impacts, the arguments, the history, all surrounding these recent U.S. visa crackdowns. based on the material we reviewed.
It's definitely a complex picture, undeniably complex, with really profound economic consequences, significant human costs.
And raising these fundamental questions about American identity and
That-
values. So as you listening process all of this, maybe mull over that core question that just keeps echoing through the sources. Does America's strength, its real strength, lie in silencing voices? Or does it lie in amplifying them? Something to think about.